What can an ancient philosopher teach us about cancel culture or fake news? What does Plato have to say about democracy, autocracy, money, healthcare, love, friendship, heroism, art, myth-making? And what makes Plato still so shockingly, scandalously subversive? How can reading Plato make us better at arguing with people who think we all a bunch of snowflakes? Welcome to the show. Today we are going to talk about a book called Why Plato Matters: What the Ancient Philosopher Can Teach Us Today by Professor Angie Hobbs. It's a book written by a professional. Now let me just say right away that I do always agree with Hobbes' interpretation of Plato, but no one has yet written a better introduction to Plato than this book, so I'm very excited to share it with you. Plato was born around 428 or 427 BCE in Athens, Greece. He lived during the golden age of Athens, when it was the cultural and intellectual capital of Greece. He was friends with the mathematician Pythagoras, the historian Herodotus, and the tragedian Euripides. He was the student of the philosopher Socrates and the teacher of the philosopher Aristotle. He was a soldier, a politician, and he founded an academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. His work inspired the Romantics, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. He is foundational to Western philosophy and civilization, but I would argue that he is not sufficiently appreciated today. Professor Angie Hobbs is a professor of Greek philosophy at the University of Cambridge and a fellow of Newnham College, Cambridge. She has written widely on Plato and has edited several collections of essays on him. Her book, Why Plato Matters, was published in 2019. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Trouble with Plato. This is not an introduction that will leave you feeling confident. Instead, Hobbes challenges us to acknowledge how difficult Plato is. She says, "I am afraid I must start with a confession. I do not find Plato easy. What Plato lacks in readability, he makes up for in thoughtfulness. His writing is rich, many-layered, polysemantic, polyvocal. His vocabulary is dense and complex. His sentences are long and involved. Plato doesn't break his sentences with periods. Instead, he uses the em-dash liberally. But he was a genius. And geniuses are infuriating because they see further and deeper than anyone else. They connect ideas and implications that elude our understanding. But if we want to know where we are going, we need only look at where Plato has been. As Hobbes says, Plato is the most frequently quoted writer in Western philosophy. There is hardly anything we can say about the history of philosophy without using him as a landmark. Chapter 2. Plato's life. Hobbes gives a nice, concise overview of Plato's life, his influences, and his friends. But she notes that Plato is a man of action, a soldier and a politician. He was part of an elite class of Athenian citizens that participated in government. Hobbes writes, Plato's career shows how Athenian democracy actually worked, how political life looked in practice, and also how far the ideal version of citizenship fell short of reality. Plato believed that a good citizen was someone who could persuade others through argument and debate. He valued the power of language and ideas, and so he wrote in dialogue form. In Chapter 3, The Socratic Method, Hobbes introduces us to the form of Plato's dialogues and the method of Socrates. Plato's dialogues are dramatic and conversational. The participants in the dialogue argue about a particular topic, which they define at the beginning of the dialogue. Socrates often plays the role of gadfly, annoying the other characters and challenging their beliefs. He asks questions, and questions some more, never giving an opinion of his own until the end. Socrates asks questions because he doesn't know the answers, and in asking these questions, he elicits answers from his interlocutors, bringing them to the surface. And then once they have defined the terms and laid out the issues, Socrates exposes the aporious or contradictions and the dilemmas in their thinking. Through this process, Socrates brings his interlocutors to a better understanding of the subject matter, but he usually leaves them with more questions than answers. As Hobbes puts it, Socrates tends to drive his companions further and further so that they can see more clearly, not because he wants to upset them, but because he wants them to improve and become better people. The goal of the Socratic method is to arrive at wisdom, but not by accumulating facts. Instead, it is by self-knowledge is knowing how much we don't know. Plato was well aware that the unexamined life is not worth living, and the fact that we examine our lives is evidence that they are worth living. Plato taught that the way of the philosopher is a way of life. As Hobbes says, the Socratic method is therefore a way of life. It is something you do day by day. It is a certain openness to the world and to experience, an eagerness to learn rather than profess, a readiness to question one's own assumptions. It's very easy to mock the Socratic method as being annoying and pedantic. But if you watch any courtroom drama, you will see that lawyers use the Socratic method all the time to expose contradictions in the testimony of witnesses. Chapter 4, Plato's World. Hobbes paints a picture of Plato's world. At the height of Athenian power, democracy reigned. But Athens was also an oligarchy. Only a small percentage of Athenians were free men and women. Slaves and foreigners had no rights. The Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars were raging. Sophists, like Protagoras, argued that there were no objective standards of morality. Anything your culture tells you is right for you. In this climate of moral skepticism, Plato sought to establish an objective standard of morality. He wanted to know, if the sophists are right, then what is right? Is there such a thing? In the Apology, Socrates defends himself against charges of impiety and corrupting the youth. He was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death. He drank the poison hemlock rather than go into exile. For Plato, the death of Socrates was a defining moment. Plato's Republic was dedicated to his memory. Chapter 5. Plato's Legacy. Plato inspired the medieval scholastics, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Romantics. He is the father of utopian fiction. His Republic describes an ideal state. He grappled with the relationship between the individual and the state, the body and the soul, freedom and necessity, appearance and reality. His theory of forms is one of the cornerstones of Western philosophy. Plato argued that the physical world that we live in is full of imperfections. Things are always changing and moving, and so this world cannot be the highest reality. There must be an eternal realm of perfect, immutable forms. The physical world is merely a shadow of this ideal world. For Plato, knowledge begins with sense experience. We perceive things through our senses. Our senses give us opinions, but opinions are always liable to be false. To acquire knowledge, we must move beyond our senses to our intellect. The intellect can grasp the true nature of things by itself, independent of sense experience. The intellect can apprehend the forms. Plato compared the human soul to a charioteer driving two horses. One horse is noble and beautiful, eager to rise above base desires. The other horse is spirited and wild, passionate and untamable. The charioteer struggles to keep these two horses in line, and Plato saw the job of the philosopher as the pursuit of wisdom, and it requires the taming of the wild horse of passion with the bit of reason. Plato's theory of the forms is his most famous philosophical position, but Hobbes argues that Plato's greatest contribution is his methodology, the dialectical method that is exemplified in his dialogues. In the Republic, Plato uses a dialectical method to arrive at his theory of the forms. He builds his theory by exposing the contradictions and the paradoxes. His method is not a set of rules. Rather, it is a flexible approach that adapts to whatever situation it encounters. Hobbes writes, "There are thus three interconnected levels on which the dialogue moves towards its conclusions. The questioning raises the issues and defines the topic. The argument explores the topic and develops solutions or resolutions. And this is grounded in a conception of the human condition that emerges from the discussion as a whole." Chapter 6. Plato's Dialogi. Plato was a playwright. He wrote his philosophy in dramatic form. He realized that a book can be judged by its cover, so he chose covers that featured engaging characters and controversies that would sell. He used metaphor and storytelling to present complex philosophical concepts, and his work is still so popular because he is so darn good at making philosophy comprehensible. As Hobbes says, he did not assume that his readers were experts in philosophy. He expected them to enter into the argument, to follow the movement of thought that he traced out before them, to judge it at each step as they went along. He gave them every opportunity to object, to disagree, to cavil or criticize, and he provided them with sympathetic characters who did exactly this. If Plato was alive today, he would be posting videos about philosophy on social media. Hobbes points out that Plato was a pioneer in the use of metaphor. In the Republic, Plato compares a soul to a city, and he compares a city to a soul. In the Allegory of the Cave, prisoners mistake shadows for reality. A prisoner escapes and comes to realize that the shadows are mere reflections of reality. When he tells the other prisoners what he has seen, they don't believe him. Plato likened the philosopher to a prisoner who has escaped and returned to tell the others the truth, but the prisoners refuse to believe him. Hobbes writes, we might say that Plato is trying to persuade us to escape from our own cave. He wants us to wake up from our slumber. He wants us to see the light. He wants us to be free. My favorite passage in the book comes near the end of chapter 6. Hobbes writes, Plato's work matters so much because it is, among other things, an exploration of the possibilities of human thought, an exploration carried on in a form that makes us complicit in the very thinking that he displays. It is a supremely generous invitation to come and see what lies within the range of human understanding. This is why Plato matters now more than ever. It is because he will bring us up against the limits of our understanding, will show us what we cannot know, while at the same time showing us how far we can see, how much we can understand. And he will do so in a way that forces us to see what lies within the range of our own understanding. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. Check out the playlist of thoughtful conversations. Leave a comment below with your thoughts about Plato. Read Hobbes' book, Why Plato Matters, and until next time, stay curious.